Okay, let's get started. And thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you joining for this 4-point webinar from branch to cloud. And what we're going to talk about is seamless document processing at the edge and around edge computing, but what it means for forms, for documents, and for the kinds of processing that most organizations do. Which is a different perspective on edge computing than you're going to see in a lot of other kinds of presentations. So we want to make this focused on document processing at the edge. As usual, this webinar is being recorded for future use. Okay. If you don't want to participate in the live recorded session, please feel free to drop and you can watch this at a later time. We'll be sending out the link and making it available. It'll be available on YouTube. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Stevens. I've been with 4-point. It's actually 7 years now. I got to update the slide. And I was one of the founding architects of what we now classify as electronic forms, as digital forms. I've been doing this for a very, very long time. To give you a little bit of personal background on it, I have 3 dogs, Bella, Piper, and Buddy, and I love to cook. I like focusing on the food, putting things together, being flexible and creative. That's where I put a lot of my creativity. Please ask your questions in the chat. There is a Q&A chat pod. You can ask your questions in there. We will have time at the end of the session, and I will go through any questions that are in there and try to focus in on those. If I do notice while I'm doing the presentation, I may stop and focus in on any questions that are relevant at the time. So feel free to add those at any point in time. What we're going to talk about is what is edge computing, how it relates to cloud computing. I want to walk through some customer examples, and I want to walk through a future vision around forms and how edge computing can change what you do with forms with some of the new technologies that are coming out. I'm going to talk about the business benefits of it and the steps that you need to go through in examining how you get to that. And then the Q&A, and then that's the end of the session. So let's start off with what is edge computing. And what it is a focus on moving processing as close to the end consumer as possible. And in a lot of cases, edge computing is focused on IoT and devices and automobiles and all of those kinds of things to put more processing capabilities local to that user environment so that we're not having to round trip data back and forth back to the different systems that we have internally. The focus of that is so that we get a highly responsive environment and we're providing feedback as quick as we can to what the user is doing. Now, the challenge with that is that you need that data in your backend systems, in the cloud server in this case, wherever those systems may reside. So how do you ensure that you're still getting it back in there, but providing the best user experience you can? And when it comes to forms, what we want to focus on is moving as much of that business process, form data capture, validation, intelligence into the user's hands, right? And I'll give some examples of how this lays out, but that's the real focus of this, is how do we push that intelligence down to that individual user. And there's a lot of advantages for this. One is there's a responsiveness aspect to it, but there's also an improved data quality associated with this. The more that we can push intelligence down to the user at the time that they're entering it, we're going to get better data for it. And let me give you an extreme alternative example. And I actually talk about this in one use case. Imagine, and you've all had this, and some of you are still doing this, is you go to a website, they say, we need you to fill out a form. Often these are government websites, and the form is a downloadable, fillable PDF. So you download it. Now, it has some intelligence in it, and it has some capabilities into it, but there's no back-end verification. There's no detailed processing. There's no dynamicism to it. So now what happens is I fill it out, or worse, I just print it and I fill it out by hand, and then I send it in because that's a valid option for a lot of people. Then I send it in. Now, as the receiving organization, you need to validate that, process it, review it. Oh, what if there are errors? How do you deal with those? Well, now we've just changed that cycle from, even in the case of a physical document going back and forth, from days, maybe weeks, to weeks, maybe months, as opposed to being able to validate that online as close to them as possible, get that information, and know we're getting good data into our systems. And this is critical when we start using AI, when we start introducing our data into larger data lake environments. All of that data needs to be good. We need to trust it, and edge computing can help with that. But how does that vary when we talk about the cloud? Well, in the cloud scenario, we're going back into the whole cloud. One, we have a latency issue, it's longer, but two, we have what is the validations that are going on in the cloud? And a lot of your systems that have moved into the cloud are core business systems. They don't have all of the knowledge to be able to validate that. Or the mechanism for reporting the validation might not be the best user experience. We know that if we're filling out an online form, we want that user experience to be, oh, I typed in an email address and it's not validly formed, or I selected a state or a province and I selected it incorrectly, right? Or validations of addresses. So the problem there is we want that down at the edge so that we are validating it immediately, because we want to provide the response in the field that the person is in. And this can be as simple as saying, I type in a telephone number and it formats it the way that we expect telephone numbers to be formatted, even though the data may just be a string of numbers, or a string with formatting or without formatting. That's what the cloud server needs. That's what your core systems need. But what the user needs to see is something completely different. So what we want to do is separate those. And often the cloud environment, the core systems, don't have those capabilities. So what we want to do is put an edge computing layer in between there that can manage that experience more efficiently, manage that experience better, so that it is acting as the data validation, the data confirmation, the data restructuring mechanism. Maybe the way that someone needs to enter data is completely different than the way that a back-end system might need to do it. And maybe your cloud services are actually just front ends for core back-end systems, perhaps on mainframes. We have organizations that are doing that kind of a thing. So how do we isolate those so that we're getting the best data all the way through, but we don't need to change the back-end systems? This also means that at the edge, we can implement new validations, new changes, new form layouts without affecting the core systems. So this isolation is a critical factor. And there's a lot of ways to describe it. We're describing it as edge computing here because we're pushing it out closer to the user. That's a valid case. Some people talk about it as a validation layer. Some people talk about it as a service layer. A lot of different ways to view it. But the concept is, how do we get as much business intelligence as close to the end user filling out that form, receiving that data, whatever they happen to be doing? If we look at a comparison between the two, you can see some of the core differentiations associated with it. Often in cloud computing, there's a more centralized aspect to it. You still might have multiple clouds, and that introduces its own factor associated with it. But when we're talking about edge, what we want to do is create distributed nodes that are closer and dedicated to the mechanism that that person is using. So you may be using an online form, and we have an edge computing node that's handling the online form and delivering back information back into the core system, whereas the core system is providing out user interfaces for internal use that are completely different. and don't have anything to do with the edge computing node that we're using. Cloud computing tends to be more remote managed, remote being remote from the user, not remote from you. They're central to what you're doing, but they're isolated, they're controlled, they're walled garden scenarios. Edge computing is closer to the users, they're still secure, but they're the secure conduit between the user's information passing it into your core system. Latency, the response time associated with this back and forth, is a key factor to this. Edge computing gives us ultra low latency, so that, and it's the way I described it, is we're responding at the instant that they enter something that this doesn't match, right? And we can build that into those, an edge node and the form, and the combination, we can bring those two things together so that even very complex interactions, you click this checkbox, therefore you must provide this information, but it can't be greater than that and has to be less than that. So we can put that right there so that all of that business logic is there, and we make it really fast for the user to experience that, to know whether they got it right or got it wrong. Okay. That also lowers overall bandwidth usage. Since we're putting it as close to the user as possible, we're not moving a lot of data back and forth over it. And we're reducing exposure, because that edge environment is thus working only with this form or a small collection of forms, or perhaps a large collection of forms, but it is isolating the core systems away from it. So the data exposure is really only data in transit that exists for a very short period of time. The other thing is you may be able to set up edge computing where it operates independently of your cloud environments, where you can pass data back to it in a manner that makes sense for the cloud environment. Those mainframe scenarios where it has to be more batch oriented, all of those kinds of things. So real-time validation for financial applications, online forms with syncing, regulatory compliance checks. Did they fill out everything that they need? Did we capture all of that data? And the real benefits are immediate feedback, reduced frustration, just a better user experience around the whole thing. And so that's the focus that we want on edge versus cloud. So let me give you some examples of this and how we've done this for some organizations. So one is a wealth management organization. What they had was they had a custom built application with limited validation on the front end. There was still some, they built some stuff into the custom application that was working inside the browser, but most of the validation was occurring on the server. And what this did was resulted in a list of errors, all right? So that you would send it back in and suddenly a bunch of fields across a complex form environment. Think about account openings that involve fund transfers from other accounts into this account, and government regulations associated with it, compliance associated with it. If you fill this out incorrectly, you're now getting all sorts of fields highlighted all over the place, having to track all of this down. And so what we've done is built a new application, browser and mobile capable, that is providing field level validation across the entire application at the time of entry. It gives immediate feedback to the user, and a substantial increase in data reliability. Now, there still is back-end validation that has to occur on this. There are complicated systems that need to do assessments that you just can't get into the front end, into the edge environment, because they require information that already resides in the cloud combined with the information that's coming in. Think things like credit analysis, loan approvals, those kinds of scenarios. So, but what we've done is reduce that down to a much smaller number of truly complex interrelationships or data we don't have at the time of validation, so that now you're just making that at the end. What that does is substantially reduces the amount of back and forth traffic between the application environment and the cloud environment. That reduces the user frustration substantially. It speeds up the process. It improves everyone's productivity because the end user gets a better environment, and the organization gets better data out of it. So that's an example of where we see this kind of scenario working. Give you another example. Acrobat forms versus intelligent forms. A lot of organizations are still using Acrobat Acrofill forms. And these are forms where you've created them in something like Word or InDesign or some other tool. You've used that to create the layout that you want. Then you've used Acrobat Professional to lay out over top of that. These are the fillable fields. Well, the problem there is that there is little to no validation on the forms. We often see scenarios where it's just a field put into a column of things. The title says percentage, but there's no validation that a number was entered. Worse, there's no validation that the number was between 1 and 100, because 0 makes no sense in this context. Oh, and that all of the percentages that you entered add up to 100. None of that's there. That means that users can do anything that they want. That means you need a lot of back-end validation. And getting that data and moving it into the organization is a challenge because the forms don't want to do that. Even if you got it automated, it's still complicated. That means you're processing images, you're processing scanned documents or printed and sent in documents, which is a whole nother layer of, it's not even cloud computing, it's not even round tripping, it's just latency because you're manually processing things. So we want to substantially reduce that by creating intelligent browser-based forms that work on browser and mobile that saves the data and gives the user the PDF, but more importantly, validates that information at the time of entry. And we know that that filled PDF is a critical document. And one of the challenges a lot of organizations have, and the reason they don't go to intelligent forms is, well, it's going to look different than my filled form. Yes, it's going to look different because it needs to look different because the user wants it to look different, but that doesn't mean we can't get you a filled form that is the compliant document that you can use internally, that you can have them print and sign to send you as the signed copy of it, that you can use as a digital signature copy. All of these things are possible. And we have multiple organizations that have made that transition from an Acrofill form to an online browser-capable form that may or may not look like the printed copy, but that can produce a PDF with all the data inserted correctly and validated and inserted into your systems, whether they're cloud-based or mainframe-based or whatever mechanism that you want. So there's a lot of options going on here that we can stop using these kinds of older mechanisms and yet still provide people with the kinds of information and the kinds of experience that they want while still giving you the data and the compliance that you need associated with it. The last example is a future vision. Imagine that you're waiting on hold on a call center. None of us like this. And you have a call center. So you have customers who don't like this, who are waiting to talk to your call center agents about something. What if you could, in this process, give them a list of, hey, if you're trying to do any one of these things, tell me, and I'll let you fill out the form over the phone. So now someone comes in, they call your call center. We want to save you the time and effort and give them a better experience. So we offer to help them fill out the form. So they say, yes, I'd like to do that. So the AI starts a conversation with that individual on the phone and guides them through the form filling process. This is pushing the computing right down to the individual as close to they can get in a way that makes perfect sense to the individual. It's asking me for information. I'm providing that information. I'm filling out the form even though I don't see a form. The AI can do this because it knows the rules for the form. It knows what it's supposed to ask, and it knows what's allowed, because we're going to use the same intelligent forms that you're using if somebody goes to a browser and fills it out. Now it has all that validation and information located inside it. Well, we're going to tell the AI about this. We're going to give this to the AI. The AI goes, well, hold on, that's a required field. Well, hold on, that has to be a telephone number, and he just gave me something else that isn't a telephone number. I can say, that's not a telephone number. Please give me your telephone number. So you can get that information. And if they've already logged in or connected and you can authenticate them, we can connect that to your backend systems to pull the data and go, hey, is this your address? Yes, that's my address. Thanks. I'll confirm that. So even if the form that you're filling out requires, for regulatory or compliance purposes, the address, you don't have to ask them to repeat their address. Now, maybe you do because it's an anonymous scenario and we don't know. All of those things are possible. When you're done, the AI can say, okay, I've got all that information. I'm going to send you a copy of the PDF to the email on file for us. If there's any problems with it, you can call back in and we can make changes. And I'm going to route it internally with the data and the PDF so that you can be viewed and checked and processed automatically. So this can change the way that you're interacting with users immediately. And now you've got data in a scenario where you didn't have to have an agent filling things out. You didn't have to have an agent talking about it and then producing a PDF and then emailing it to them and then getting it back and confirming that it was signed or whatever associated with it. It also means that instead of just sending them a PDF, you can now incorporate digital signatures. I'm going to send it to you for a digital signature. They're going to receive it, digitally sign it, and you get it back in, and now you controlled it in your digital signature process, in your digital signature workflow. This is the kind of vision that we're trying to build towards. This is the kind of capability that we believe organizations need, and this is how we push that computing as far away from your systems and into, as close as we can, to those end users to make it easier and better for them. Now let's talk a bit about the business benefits of edge computing. So it's the immediate feedback I talked about. It's reducing the delay in response time, not just through latency, but also having it immediate in the field that I'm in, so that it says, this field is wrong, don't continue. This field is a required field. You must fill this out, all right? So it's that kind of thing that is giving that person that immediate feedback. And there's been multiple studies, but that kind of an experience is a much better user experience. Not only is it a better user experience, but it's a smoother interaction. I'm not going to have to go back and forth and back and forth. And that reduces your back-end processing. That reduces your costs, and we've seen savings up to 30% because of the amount of effort it is required to review the document, go back to them, get it corrected, and all of those kinds of situations back and forth with the user, which just frustrates the user. And it improves compliance because you can keep the data as local as possible. It's moved in only when it needs to be moved in. When it's moved in with the compliant document that was required for the entire process. So all of these things are bringing a better user experience, improved data security and integrity, and improve productivity for your teams, less effort going back and forth with your users. All of these are possible by increasing that level of edge functionality that organizations are looking for. A roadmap towards edge adoption is really a roadmap towards how you're migrating your forms away from a download, fill, print, and send model into a model that allows for online interactions and online capability. So what we want to do is first identify and prioritize the use cases, right? And a key thing here that we see happen often, and I want to caution you against it, is we'll take the most complex one, or we'll take the most valuable one. Yes, that's a good start, but often projects like this, because they're going to involve hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of forms and documents and interactions, need to demonstrate early capabilities associated with it. So often what we recommend is that we don't look at the most complex workflow that is going to require all sorts of interactions and security teams and database teams together. Maybe we just take the simple forms and put those up so that we can demonstrate the value associated with it. However, the prioritization is going to be up to you and the factors associated with what you're going to be doing, but consider looking at simpler use cases to prove the capabilities and to prove the value associated with it. Once people see simple forms, then they start to look and go, well, why can't we do the more complex? We can, it's just a little bit more effort. And that effort often pops out in the second phase, identify the required connections and interactions. A form that is more standalone, that someone can produce a better experience, fill that out, validations and everything and the edge, and then process back into the system, but processes is that as a PDF or comes back in as data that is then parsed and moved into a different location, has fewer connections. That means it's easier to implement, faster to implement, yet still demonstrates the value of this kind of an approach. Something that has more connections, more integrations, has to pull data from multiple systems, wants pre-population, has a lot of dynamic elements of it, requires more consideration of how we're going to do that. How is the edge node going to be able to interact with all of these different systems that might be out there? How is it going to pull all of that data together and then disperse all of the data to the appropriate location? That might require some customization, some additional development. So that's part of the prioritization. Then we want to figure out what the architecture looks like. How many nodes? How centralized are the nodes? How dispersed are the nodes? How regional are the nodes? What is the node environment associated with it? Where do the forms connect into the nodes? Which forms go where? How do we separate those? Do we have regional differences, regional characteristics? A lot of organizations might have, well, we've got different forms for different states. Oh, okay, well, maybe then we want different isolation associated with them. Security architecture, how are we interacting the edge environment with the core systems environment, with the cloud environment? How are we connecting those two together? How are we wrapping them in VPNs? What do the APIs look like? All of those different kinds of pieces, right? Where is the data flowing? How much are we keeping of our current process? Because we still may need physical documents to be processed. Are we reducing that footprint because we're expecting a reduction in the physical? What does that look like? How does it interact with all of it? Then develop those edge application environments, those edge application forms, all right, and then pilot and scale them out as per the prioritization that we started with in the first step. Following this kind of a process gives a clear indication of which ones you're going to do so that everyone has a clear understanding of what the prioritization is, why the prioritization is, how you're going to go through and deploy these out so that each individual business group, each individual geography, whatever your segmentation that you're using is, can look at it and go, oh, I know when my stuff is coming out. But it also goes back to the architecture and connections is those may need additional time to be developed. So how are we rolling things out so that we get some forms out but we're building the connections in the back end. We're changing the cloud computing architecture. We're changing the core servers. We're adding new integration pieces. How is that all phased in together. So now that's a lot of stuff that we've covered there. And we fully understand that you may need additional assistance in understanding your particular situations. And so this is our special offer to you, is a 1 hour one-on-one to help you understand how this type of architecture could work in your environment, how it could benefit what you're trying to do, how we can help you define that critical next step and really create a vision for moving to these next generation forms, so this next generation architecture, to really take advantage of what this kind of an architecture can offer to you and to your users, to your productivity, and to their user experience. If you're interested in this, please send an email to marketing@4point.com, and we'd be happy to get back to you and organize this call so that we can have this conversation and get you started on this. So with that, that is a high-level quick overview of that. And so now what I want to do is see if there are any questions. So I'm going to check the question chat pod, and yes, there are some questions. So how do you handle the users who need a printed or physical copy of a form? And I mentioned this in a couple of scenarios, but let me dive into that a little bit more effectively. You are going to still need to provide physical copies, downloadable copies, okay, of forms, because some users are going to need those. Some users are going to need them on behalf of others, where they need to print them out and physically fill them out. That is going to happen, okay? We're striving as an industry and as businesses to reduce that volume of usage, all right? But the term is used as equitability, is making it equal for everyone to have access to the services. This is especially true if you're state and local, federal government. You need to do this, but many corporations still want to be able to service individuals who do not have access or who do not wish to use a computer to do these kinds of things. What we want to do is not remove those. What we want to do is put those all into one environment so that there is one source of truth, one environment that's producing all of the forms. The physical form that someone might download and print, a physical form that maybe a branch agent prints out for someone to fill out manually, the online form, the form that's driving the AI. We want all of those to come from one place. What we don't want is multiple different versions of source for that form. Oh, the printed one is a Word document, but the online one is built in this custom tool over here, and the business rules are over there. Because what that does is it means when you go to change it, you have to touch multiple places. So what we're trying to do is advise organizations to reduce the number of source documents, but have those source documents be able to create all of these different environments. Right? So that you can still provide a physical one. The vision we have, and some organizations are moving towards this, is your forms portal. I go to your corporate website and I go type in forms in your search box, and I get 100, 1,000 hits, and then there's forms for wealth management, and you click on that and there's a list of forms. And right now there may be fillable PDFs, maybe downloadable PDFs. We want buttons next to them that says, fill it out online, fill it out using AI-assisted form filling, download it and fill it out, download it and print it, so that the user has an option associated with it. But we want, for your simplicity and for your ease of use, for your compliance, we want those all coming from one place. So that's how we handle it. Yes, you're still going to need those. We fully understand that. We just don't want to make that the default. We don't want to force everyone to download, print it, and send it in, or fill it out and print it and send it in. How do we get more people online so that everybody's happier associated with it? In your future example, what is processing the data And how does it get back to the core systems? Do they need to be connected to the AI? In the scenario that I laid out, no, they are not connected to the AI. The edge computing environment is acting as that gateway, that service layer between the AI environment, okay, the conversation associated with it. And then when the user has said, I've got all of the data, the AI hands the data off to an edge computing environment, which then knows where it's supposed to send that data. So it exists at the edge as data in transit and passed along. In most scenarios where we're talking to organizations about that future scenario, and that is something that we can demonstrate to you today as a capability of how you can do this using voice and filling it out for many of you with forms you have in your organization today. All right, not all of you, because you're not all using the same kind of an environment, but for many of you, we can do that. It's the edge computing environment that's handling that relationship between all of the systems. The AI is your AI. It is your organization's licensed AI that is being used. Your service, whoever you're paying for your service, it's using that mechanism to do that kind of thing. So you have a license with them to allow you to do that. And then this is a conversation that is enabled at the edge based on the intelligence in the form, where that data now is handled by the edge system, which is your system, and moved back into the core systems in a way that makes sense for the core systems. The advantage of that comes back to the whole advantage of edge computing. Even though it was AI and a conversation, or someone is using a mobile device to fill out the form, or someone's using a browser to fill out the form, all three of those came from the same source. And so all three of those, the edge environment then looks at it and goes, I know what the data needs to be, even though it's three different environments that captured it, it's the same data structure that's being passed back in. And that's critical for your interconnections, for your data integrity through the system, and for simplification at the cloud and core level, in that you can say, this is the data that I need. The edge delivers that regardless of the mechanism that was used to capture that data, whether it was a conversation, whether it was a mobile device, whether it was a browser-based device, however it is, the edge can homogenize that and simplify it. That makes your life easier from a connection perspective. And with that, I want to end it at this point in time. Thank you all very, very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And if you do have any questions, please reach out to us. And if you're interested in having a one-on-one conversation to understand how this might apply to you and your organization, please reach out to marketing@4point.com. Thanks so much.